Welcome back to Insights. I'm Lauren Mixon, and I'm here with Andrea Mills of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. Today we are talking about invasive species in the Great Lakes, and right now we're taking a look at sea lamprey, one of the most prominent invasive species in the Great Lakes. So let's kind of talk about that and what they're doing and how they got here.
Sure. So I mentioned earlier that there are over 180 non-native species in the Great Lakes. And of those 180, only 2 of them are actually controlled. The 2 invasive species that are controlled are the sea lamprey and the alewife. Now, sea lamprey are one of the single most devastating, if not the most devastating invasive species to have ever come into the Great Lakes. And they're also one of the invasive species that we've been living with the longest. They first invaded in the 1860s into Lake Ontario, and then by the 1920s they had spread into Lake Erie, and by the late 1930s they had invaded all of the other Great Lakes. So there's no better way to meet a sea lamprey than to actually get up close and personal. So I'm going to pull out a real live sea lamprey right now. So the sea lamprey are a little wily.
They are. They're a little squirmy.
They're a little squirmy. I have a 4-year-old at home, and I would say they're about as squirmy as a little kid, which is saying something. So this is a sea lamprey, and now this is a little one. I grabbed the little one just to help make everyone a bit more comfortable. So this is a full-grown adult lamprey. Lamprey are basically vampire fish. What they do is they are a type of parasite that attaches to other fish, and then they use their mouth, which is like basically a suction cup with teeth, almost 150 teeth in a sea lamprey's mouth. They suck onto the side of a fish, and then they take their tongue. So right in the center of the mouth is a sea lamprey's tongue. That tongue is lined with teeth, and they'll use that toothed tongue to lick or lash a hole through the side of the fish. And then once they've made that hole, out comes the blood and the other bodily fluids of the fish.
Oh, that sounds so scary.
They are pretty horrifying, and they are pretty scary. If you were a fish, you should be terrified of sea lamprey because they are so harmful. These sea lamprey, each sea lamprey can kill about 40 pounds of fish during its life. And before we could control sea lamprey in the Great Lakes, there were about 2.5 million sea lamprey swimming around in the Great Lakes. With each one killing 40 pounds of fish, that is 100 million pounds of fish that was dying every single year due to sea lamprey invading the Great Lakes. And it was catastrophic to the Great Lakes ecosystem. I think we'll get this sea lamprey back in the tank unless you'd like to touch or hold the sea lamprey now.
You gave me a glove, so I committed to holding it. So
Fantastic.
we'll see if I can hold it without it getting
Sure, there you go.
too squirmy. So yeah, it doesn't have any bones, correct?
Correct. It has a cartilaginous skeleton. It's not a bony fish. It also doesn't have a jaw. That's one of the other distinctions to sea lampreys, that they are jawless, and they are very ancient. The lamprey lineage is over 360 million years old, so they're far older than the dinosaurs.
Oh, wow.
In fact, they've actually survived the 4 mass extinction events, 4 major mass extinction events that have occurred through time. The lamprey have survived it.
That is very interesting. I did not know that. So I'm actually going to hand this back to you because it looks like this one is ready to go.
So I will tell one last thing. We'll get this one back into the tank. We'll give it a break, and I'm going to pull out one of the bigger ones. Here we go. Start small and move our way up.
Yes.
So one of the key things about sea lamprey that everyone needs to know, while they are deadly to fish, they are not harmful directly to people. Sea lamprey do not attack people. So always keep that in mind. You should never be concerned about swimming anywhere in the Great Lakes because of sea lamprey. They will not attack people. The exception, though, is that if you were to stick something in front of a sea lamprey's mouth, they will attach. Whether it's this beautiful table here, they've attached to that, or if you stick a hand in front of a lamprey's mouth, it will attach. But I'm not nervous about this lamprey attaching because it's not trying to drink my blood. It's not trying to rip a hole through my hand with its tongue. All it's doing is attaching simply because it's something that the sea lamprey naturally do. Essentially for a lamprey, it's sink, swim, or suck. Unless they're actively swimming out in a lake or they have sucked onto something like a fish, they'll always tend to sink. And so if given the opportunity, they will attach to something simply to maintain their position in the water. But if you were to come across a sea lamprey while swimming, that lamprey will avoid you.
Okay.
So never fear sea lamprey in the water in terms of having a lamprey attached to you. But there are many good reasons that people should fear, so to speak, or not be happy about sea lamprey in the Great Lakes because of all the harm that lamprey do to fisheries.
Yes, definitely. Now, you did bring some examples of the life cycle of a sea lamprey. So let's talk about those.
Sure. So each female sea lamprey can produce anywhere from 60,000 to 100,000 eggs. And what is in the jar here would be all of the eggs from a single female sea lamprey. It's an enormous amount of eggs for such a small organism to produce. Now, of course, not all of those 60,000 or 100,000 eggs would survive. We think it's about 10% across the board on average throughout the Great Lakes. So that still means 6,000 to 10,000 new lamprey for every single male and female that find each other in the Great Lakes and mate. And unfortunately, sea lamprey are actually very good at finding potential mates. You might not guess it, but the sea lamprey has a tremendous sense of smell. It's about 100 times better than even a German shepherd.
Wow.
They can smell out, they can sniff out other lamprey from miles away. And so the males and females in particular are very good at sniffing each other out, finding each other, and then mating. And so all it takes is just a few adult sea lamprey, at least one male and one female, to reach the same area. They can find each other, reproduce, these eggs develop, and then a population can be established. The adults die after spawning, which is a good thing, so they spawn only once in their life. These eggs, of course, live on. After about 2 weeks, those eggs will hatch and out pop many thousands of larval sea lamprey. These sea lamprey are just a few months old. They're probably 2 or 3 months old at this point. They're about the size of a grain of rice. This spawning I haven't mentioned yet. The spawning of sea lamprey occurs in streams, and their young life stages live in streams for about the first 5 years of their life. So as a larvae, they form burrows in the bottom of the stream. After about 3 to 4 years, they're about the size of a green bean. And about a year later than this, the sea lamprey goes through a special change in its life called a metamorphosis. Now, prior to the metamorphosis, these sea lamprey are essentially totally harmless. They only filter feed. So they filter the microorganisms from the water. They do not harm fish. It's the metamorphosis when the sea lamprey become harmful. During their metamorphosis, they gain their eyes, and they gain fully developed fins, and most importantly, they gain that mouth with all of those teeth.
Right.
And so this is what a newly metamorphosed parasitic sea lamprey looks like.
Oh, wow.
So at this point, it is ready to leave the stream it was born in and go out into a lake and begin feeding on fish. Now, if there's ever a stage that is modestly cute for a sea lamprey, I think it's this stage because it's just like a miniature version of the adult. But even at this stage, they are cold-blooded killers. And cold-blooded because they are a type of fish, so they are cold-blooded, and killers because this small sea lamprey now is lethal.
Right.
And it will kill about 40 pounds of fish over the next year to a year and a half of its life. And at the end of that year to a year and a half, they will have grown into the size of an adult. And then they will pick a stream to spawn in, and the cycle will repeat itself.
Well, it looks like these are definitely causing some problems, which we're going to touch on that a little bit more when we come back. And we'll be right back with more insights.